Now, fat is very misunderstood. It's been demonised for decades and it's been blamed for making people fat and a whole host of other diseases like heart disease and those types of things. So naturally, the thought of being low fat was thought to be healthy. Manufacturers started developing low fat foods, they started replacing the fat with sugar instead, but all the problems fat was meant to be causing weren't going away. So in those decades where fat was demonised, obesity increased, rates of heart disease increased, and all the other things that low-fat diet was meant to prevent. And then it turned full circle, where now it seems fat is the saviour. Healthy fats and a high-fat diet is really good for you. Doing the Atkins or being on a ketogenic diet is the way forward. So what's the real answer? Well, in this video I'm going to give a rundown of fat and I'm going to talk about what happens if you have too much and too little. So first off, fat is a really important macronutrient. If you completely removed it from your diet, you would find you would suffer serious health consequences. However, it is a form of energy, and if you have too much, you'll put body fat on. And fat contains more calories per gram than any other macronutrient, so it's much easier to overconsume this in terms of calories. But it's massively important. Really important nutrients, such as vitamins A, D, E and K, are all fat soluble, so they need fat to be absorbed by the body. Fat also helps to create and regulate hormones, and this is massively important in men and testosterone. It forms our brains and our nervous system. It helps support a healthy immune system. So it's really not something you want in short supply within the diet. Now, not all fat is equal, and fat is a lot more complicated than carbohydrates because there are different forms. So you've got three. You've got saturated, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. For good health, each of these fats needs to be included in the diet, and ideally they'd all be balanced out, so they'd have a ratio of 1/3 each within the diet. The issue with the Western diet is that it's more heavily dominated by saturated fat than it is the other two. So we're thinking the fat on meat and stuff like cheese. And so if you think about your diet, we generally have more of those types of things than we do the other types, which would include things such as avocado, olive oil, nuts, fish, flax oil, algae oil or hemp oil. Now there is a type of fat that you want to avoid, and they are trans fats, also known as hydrogenated fats. So the reason manufacturers use these fats is because they're cheap, so they can make more profit. They taste really good, so it keeps you coming back, and they don't really go off, so they have a really long shelf life. In nature, you'll tend to find that there aren't really any forms of trans fats. They're all cis isomers, which means that they can fold up on themselves. Trans fats can't fold up, they don't kink on themselves, so they are very rigid. Now, this becomes a problem, especially if your body is using those fats to make cell membranes, for example. Because when it goes into the cell membrane of something like a blood vessel, an artery, because of it being rigid, it's going to mean that that cell will lose its elasticity, and that's going to make blood pressure go up. It's going to make plaques easier to attach and build up on the arteries, which is then going to lead to problems such as heart disease. So to avoid these trans fats, you need to start looking on the ingredients label, and you want to be looking for oils that should be a liquid at room temperature but are in a solid food. And believe me, when you start looking, they are everywhere. So the naturally occurring fats, they are not bad for you. A classic example of this is where natural butter is better for you than processed margarine. Okay, moving on to polyunsaturated fats. The main focus is the omega-3 fatty acid and the omega-6 fatty acid. These are called essential because we can only get them from the diet. So omega-6 promotes inflammatory responses in the body, which are important, and omega-3 promotes anti-inflammatory responses. So getting that balance is a key. The issue with most Western diets is that they're far too high in omega-6 than omega-3, sometimes at a ratio of 25:1. The problem with too high omega-6 intake is that there's too much inflammation, which then leads to its own problems within the body. So increasing omega-3 is important for both health and inflammation profile, and it can be found in things like fatty fish, fish oils, flax oil, chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, algae oil. And now think, how many types of these food are you getting in your diet? I imagine not many, and that explains the imbalance we see. Omega-6 is typically found in cereals, whole grain breads, nuts, and most vegetable oils. And because most vegetable oils are used to make trans fats, which are in most processed food, and all that food tastes nice, the imbalance becomes explained even more. And this results in increased inflammation in the body, leading to many of the health problems we see in the world today. Omega-3, however, isn't an amazing health food that it's sometimes touted. It just means that we aren't getting enough. So taking a fish oil supplement would be good as it's high in omega-3, but only because it helps address that 3-6 balance. Have too much though, so the balance goes the other way around, and that isn't good either. I like to try and keep it as simple as possible, but a statement that fat is good for you or is bad for you is far too broad. It's about trying to balance it all out. Saturated fat gets demonized not because it's bad for you, but because we normally get too much. Just eating meat will give you enough saturated fat, so focus instead on getting the other types to help balance it out. Take a fish oil supplement and eat fatty fish like salmon for omega-3. Include avocado and extra virgin olive oil to get monounsaturated fats and minimize processed food to avoid trans fats. This brings me to my very last point on fats, I promise. If you're cooking with fats, don't cook with oils, especially extra virgin olive oil and normal olive oil, because they've got really low smoke points and then you'll lose all of its health benefits. Cook instead with a saturated fat like butter or coconut oil, which are more stable. Very last point, coconut oil, praised as the perfect healthy fat, and it can be healthy in a balanced fat profile, but it doesn't mean it should be overconsumed because then that will make it unhealthy. And that's the same for anything. Water, very healthy, but if you have too much, it can cause serious health consequences, even death. So if you're bothered about health, the easiest way is to eat mainly natural sources and avoid processed ones. If you're not bothered about health, but just bothered about overall body composition, then it's really about making sure your overall energy balance is good, with fats being a part of it. If you found this video helpful and you think someone else will, then please share it. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like. If you want to see more videos like this, then please subscribe.